There's something kind of strange about money. You might be making more than before, more stable than before. But deep down, you still feel like you're not really okay. You still hesitate before spending. There's still this very subtle tension every time money leaves your account. Not because you don't have money, but because you don't fully understand what's actually going on with your money. I've realized. This feeling doesn't come from how much money you have. It comes from how you're experiencing money on a daily basis. Most people don't notice this. Your experience with money isn't just numbers. It's the feeling when you open your banking app. It's how you react when an unexpected expense shows up. It's that quick thought in your head. Should I really spend this? A very simple example. You're about to pay for something. It's not expensive, not luxury, not something you can afford. But right before you hit confirm, you pause for 2-3 seconds, not because you don't have the money, but because there's this feeling in your head that's hard to name. It's not exactly worry, not exactly regret. Just uncomfortable, and here's the interesting part. That feeling shows up, even when your finances are actually better than before. And most people never really stop to figure out where it's coming from. Main idea 1. You're not spending money, you're reacting to uncertainty. I've realized something that very few people clearly see. When you spend money, you're not just buying something, you're facing a quiet question underneath. Am I making the right decision? And interestingly, that question shows up almost every time, no matter how big or small the amount is. For example, you subscribe to an online service. It's not expensive, you can easily afford it, but after you pay, you still go back and check, not to look at the receipt, but to reassure yourself, yeah, that should be fine. Most people don't realize that need for reassurance has nothing to do with the amount of money, it has everything to do with how certain you feel about your decision. If you feel certain, spending feels light. If you don't, even small amounts feel heavy. And here's the key point. Most financial stress doesn't come from not having enough money, it comes from not being sure if you're using your money the right way. You're not lacking money, you're lacking clarity. And when you lack clarity, every spending decision turns into something you have to think through. Over time, money stops being a tool, it becomes a quiet source of pressure, something you constantly have to evaluate. Something you never feel completely comfortable using. The takeaway, you're not tired from spending money. You're tired because every time you spend, it feels like you're taking a small test. Main idea 2. You don't actually know what enough feels like. I've realized something very subtle. But it affects almost every financial decision you make. Most people don't have a clear definition of enough. Not enough to survive, but enough to feel secure. And here's the interesting part. You can increase your income. You can save more, but if your idea of enough isn't clear, the feeling of not enough never goes away. For example, you just got paid, your account looks pretty solid, but the moment you think about upcoming expenses, rent, a trip, something uncertain, that feeling shows up immediately. This might not be enough, not because you actually can afford it, but because you don't know where enough ends. Most people don't realize your brain doesn't like uncertainty. And when there's no clear boundary, it defaults to safety. Better assume it's not enough, and when that thought repeats long enough, it becomes your baseline. You start living with money, as if you're always just on the edge of not having enough. Not actually lacking, but always feeling like you might, and that creates something interesting. You never feel fully comfortable spending money, because there's always a voice in your head. What if I need this later? So you delay, you hesitate, you overthink even small decisions, not because you can afford it, but because you don't have a clear reference point. The takeaway, when you don't know what enough is, any amount can start to feel like not enough. Main idea 3. You don't spend based on value, you spend based on your emotional state. I've realized something pretty paradoxical. We think we spend money because something is worth it. But in reality, most spending decisions come from how we feel in that moment. Not logic, but state. For example, there are days when you feel clear and stable. You look at something and think, I don't really need that. But that same item, on a day when you're tired, or something feels off, or you just want to feel a little better, suddenly becomes it's worth it. The interesting part, the item didn't change, the price didn't change. Only you did, most people don't notice. Spending money is often a very fast way to shift your emotional state. Not to gain something, but to feel different. You're not buying because you need it. You're buying because you want to feel something else. More comfortable, less overwhelmed. A little more in control on a messy day, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if you don't recognize it, you start confusing, I need this, with, I need to feel different, and once those two get mixed together, money stops being a tool, it becomes a way to manage your internal state, and that's when you look at your account and wonder why money seems to disappear faster than expected. Not because you're overspending, but because every time you spend, you're solving something that isn't really about money. The takeaway, you don't spend based on the value of the item. You spend based on your state of mind. Main idea 4. You're not losing money, you're buying temporary peace of mind. I've realized something that's a bit uncomfortable at first. A lot of the money we spend isn't actually about getting something. It's about reducing a feeling, not desire, but relief. A very simple example, you have a small task to deal with. Not difficult, not urgent, but it just sits there in your mind. A slight discomfort, not strong enough to force you to act right away, but strong enough that you keep thinking about it. And then you choose a very quick solution. You pay to make it go away. Maybe you hire someone. Maybe you pay for a faster option. Maybe you just choose the path that requires less thinking. And here's the interesting part. You're not buying the solution. You're buying the feeling. Finally, it's done. Most people don't realize that feeling of relief after spending money is incredibly addictive because it's fast. It's clear and it creates closure. Whereas if you handle it yourself, you have to spend time, you have to sit with that unfinished feeling. And our brains don't like unfinished, so money becomes a way to close open loops, not because you can handle it, but because you don't want to carry that feeling any longer. And this leads to something very subtle. You start using money as a tool to reduce mental pressure, not to optimize your finances, but to optimize how you feel. And when this happens often enough, you don't even realize you're spending more, because every expense feels reasonable in the moment. But overall, your money is being used to buy short-term peace. The takeaway, you're not just spending money to solve problems. You're spending money to end the feeling of something being unfinished in your mind. Main idea 5. You're not really controlling money, you're trying to control your anxiety about it. I've realized something a lot of people misunderstand. They think they're very disciplined with money, tracking expenses, logging everything, checking their accounts constantly. From the outside, it looks like control, but interestingly, the feeling inside doesn't actually get lighter. There's still a subtle tension, still a need to keep an eye on things, still a part of your mind always thinking about money. A very familiar situation. You just checked your account, everything looks fine, but a few hours later, you check again, not because anything changed, but because you want to make sure everything is still okay. Most people don't realize that's not controlling money, that's controlling a feeling, a form of self-reassurance. Yeah, everything's under control, but here's the problem. That uneasy feeling doesn't go away just because you check more often. It fades for a moment, then comes back, and so you repeat the cycle. Check, confirm, feels slightly better. Then return to the same state. A very quiet loop, and this creates a dangerous illusion. You think you're doing well with money, but you're actually spending energy, trying to maintain a temporary sense of stability. And the more you try to control that feeling, the more you end up thinking about money. Money becomes something constantly present in your mind. Not because you lack it, but because you don't feel fully secure with it. The takeaway, you're not tired because money is complicated. You're tired because you're constantly trying to feel okay about it. Main idea 6. You don't actually lack money, you lack a system you trust. I've realized something most people never really name. What makes you feel uneasy about money? Isn't the amount you have. It's that you don't trust how your money is working. It sounds strange, but notice this. There are months when you earn well. Your spending isn't extreme, but you still feel like, I am not sure everything is actually okay, not because there's a clear problem, but because you don't see a complete picture. Money comes in, money goes out, but it all feels like separate pieces. There's no clear structure to rely on. Most people don't realize, when you don't have a system, every financial decision becomes a separate decision, and every time, you have to think it through from scratch. Should I spend this? Is it reasonable? Will it affect anything? A few times is fine, but when you do that every day, your brain gets tired, not because money is hard, but because you're constantly processing it. A simple example. Some people have a clear structure. This portion is for spending, this is for saving, this is for investing. When they spend within the allowed category, they barely think about it, not because they're careless, but because they trust the system they built. On the other hand, if you don't have that structure, every expense, even small ones, has to go through a decision process, and that builds pressure over time. The interesting part is, when you start trusting a system, your entire experience with money shifts. Not because you have more money, but because you no longer have to reevaluate everything every time you spend. You don't need to control every dollar, you just need to trust that your system is working. The takeaway. You don't lack money, you lack a way to stop thinking about money all the time. I've realized something very simple. But if you truly see it, the way you experience money changes completely. Money has never just been about numbers. It's the feeling you have when you use it, the level of trust you have in your decisions. Whether you have to think every time you spend or not, most people try to earn more, hoping the feeling will improve. But interestingly, if the way you experience money doesn't change, the feeling doesn't really change either. You still hesitate, still check, still feel unsure, just with bigger numbers, and at some point, you begin to realize what you've been looking for isn't more money, it's a very specific feeling, peace of mind. Not the temporary relief after checking your account, not the relief of avoiding a purchase, but the kind of peace where you don't have to think about money all the time. And to get there, you don't need more control. You need more understanding. Understanding how you react to money. Understanding what actually creates tension for you. Understanding why you feel not enough even when things are fine. Once you see those clearly, money stops being something that drains you. It goes back to what it was meant to be. A tool, nothing more, nothing less. If any part of this video felt a little too familiar, you might have just noticed something you've been feeling for a long time but never clearly named. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and if you want to better understand how money actually shapes your thinking and behavior, you can subscribe. We keep exploring things that most people experience but rarely talk about.